be talking a little bit about fashion, experience, transformation, and how thinking about the things we wear matters. My name is Julia Valle Noronha. I am an assistant professor in fashion design at Aalto University. Okay, and as I run my eyes across the audience here today, I'm pretty confident to say that everyone is dressed. Especially here in the weather cold in Finland, you probably spend most of your time dressed, even if you are a huge sauna enthusiast. So I could say that this is something in fashion that really brings all of us together, as fashion connects to us so intimately and so closely. And I can share another story to add to that. In 2006, when I was starting my career as a fashion designer in Brazil, my home country, I had some really interesting news. The Brazilian Fashion Weeks figured then as the second most media covered event in the country. Would you guess what was the first?
Food.
Sorry? Food. Well, that could be a good one. But, well, maybe if you tried or if you were thinking about guessing, you may have guessed the World Cup. That means that in Brazil, most people were more interested in fashion than in, let's say, the carnival or politics, for instance. And I think that is something that, it made me give this great sense of empowerment, a little bit of fear, but also a great sense of responsibility. And as I was working in the field for about a decade, I started feeling that sense of empowerment being blossomed. I realized that my reach as a fashion designer in the fashion industry, I was then a head designer in a big fashion house, my reach was quite reduced. I couldn't really change the field as much as I liked to. And because of that, I decided to quit my job in 2013 and start a new career as an academic. The question that I had then when I started my academic career and that I still carry with me until today is, can we, as fashion designers, affect the ways that people relate to the things they wear for more responsible futures? To unpack this idea and the findings that came with the research, I would like to start from a definition of fashion as what people wear. It may sound extremely simplistic, right? But it actually hides quite a lot of this great diversity of practices around wearing. And I think it's very valuable for that. Thinking about fashion as what people wear also allows us to think beyond the fashion industry and include society, the environment, emotions as well. And this is something that is really interesting. Fashion empowers, threatens, brings together and sets apart most of the 8 billion people in the world today. I invite you to, fashion, for example, played a very important role in women's emancipation movement in Europe, which reverberated later also to other countries in the world. You can think of the work of many fashion designers that were working post-Second World War, and how they had this idea of women holding equal rights as men. And this idea was also manifested in clothing, having jersey and trousers for women as fashion items, for example. However, we still tend to pay attention quite a lot to only the visuality of fashion and not so much about these other things that fashion can do. So I invite you to think about something just to reflect about the ways that we relate to fashion as well. So I invite you to think of the experience of buying new clothes for yourself. You go to a shop and you see something that you like on the racks. You take it to the changing room, you put it on, and probably the first thing that you're going to think is, does it fit? And you look at the mirror and you think, how do I look at it? Right? But beyond this fitting and how do we look at it, there is so much more to fashion. We can think, for instance, how we feel the weight of a coat on the shoulder seam, for instance. We can think about how we feel wool on our skin. We can also think how a high-waist trouser may invite us to sit in a higher chair. Or how a white shirt, like the one that I'm wearing today, may suggest me to avoid tomato sauce at the canteen. But in reality, we don't really act this way, right? We don't think about fashion in such terms. Researchers have shown that with the advent of mass production, we have moved from thinking of things from an aesthetic of experience, an aesthetic of change, to an aesthetic of seriality. We started to put the focus much more on the superficiality of things, rather than on what other things they can offer us, in terms of fashion, on how things look. So what if the garments we wear invited us to pay attention to the relationship that we have with the things we wear, instead of the sheer visuality of it? In my doctoral research, I looked into the relationships between people and the things they wear, and how a change in the design process could promote a change in people's attitudes, perceptions, and visuals, aesthetic perceptions as well. Could design help us regain an appreciation for the aesthetics of change and experience? Can design help us make a shift for more sustainable futures? To answer this question, I designed clothing with this challenge in mind, and I studied people's relationship to them over the period of 2 years. The study indicated some connections between the qualities and properties of the clothing and things that people could perceive and change in their attitudes and the ways that they live. For example, novel shapes in the garment supported a more strong interaction between people and the things that they wear. They could make adaptations, for instance, or they could also try to find their own ways to comfort. It could be an aesthetic, a tactile, or even a psychological comfort. That turned pieces into more versatile garments, but also supported bonds, stronger bonds. In addition, care practices with the clothing supported an understanding of the materiality of clothing, but also of the making process. For example, when you iron a shirt, you may realize how the pattern of the garment is made, something that is not usually put forward in the fashion and in clothing. Or when you wash clothes, you may understand more about the qualities of a material. And that also, of course, we're gaining knowledge about garments, about clothing production, about materials, but also supports longevity. So we care for our clothes longer. So yeah, the study has shown that clothing is able to affect relationships. You can think, for instance, of applications in the industry, let's say about experience-driven fitting, research informed design, or even participatory design with clients. But let's get back to where we departed. We hear a lot about how fashion is one of the most polluting industry in the world today, right? This is something that it has been on the news, and especially for us researching fashion, it's hitting us all the time. But I would like to challenge that. Knowing of all these things that I said before, I would like us to think of fashion as one of the most engaging industries in the world. But let's think about how exactly this capacity for engagement can drive change in the most pressing issue today, that of climate collapse. Sustainability scientists have proposed a framework that suggests a hierarchy of levels of transformation, which I try to simplify here in this image. At the top of this figure, you have low-impact interventions, things which are usually very easy to implement because they are so simple. They don't make that gigantic change in the world, but they do something. So, for instance, you can think of changing the material of a batch of 200,000 t-shirts from virgin polyester to organic cotton, for instance. So, of course, there's a change then, right? But the industry largely remains the same. At the middle of the pyramid, there is something which we call mid-level interventions. So they are transformative to a certain extent. For example, you can think of design for circularity, which is usually portrayed there. So it doesn't only affect the industry, but also demands that we think about other parts of the process, how we design, and how people are going to react to those things as well. At the bottom of the figure, we're almost there. At the bottom of the figure are interventions which are certainly much harder to achieve, but they are able to truly enable transformation. They include the change of value systems or aesthetic perceptions, which are things that are crucial to fashion. So being able to change people's mindsets and value systems through clothing can be a major step in achieving transformation. And moving from a focus on aesthetic of visual to aesthetic of experience could be a way to achieve that. Now, to end this talk, I want to invite you to a quick reflection. Knowing that sustainability literally means the ability to sustain, what would you like to sustain in fashion? And I think this is my answer, which is this emotional dimension of fashion. And that's it. Thank you so much.